When it comes to Flash games, there are few titles that are as legendary or iconic as the title Stickwart, and for good reason. This game does everything right and has everything you could want in an RTS game. It has action, challenge, unit upgrades, strategy, and a cohesive story. Each unit has its own strength and weakness, making each one unique and useful in its own way. So today we're going to do a rundown of the game in its entirety and explore what makes it so great. Starting with the intro, I don't know if it's because I just watched all the Mad Max movies this week, but something about the way the intro explains that the game's world has all these factions that worship their own individual weapon technology really reminded me of a dystopian future that you might find in a Mad Max movie. The game world is divided up into these different warring nations, as I mentioned. Each nation worships their own style of weapons, such as archers, swords, spears, and magic. Our objective throughout the game is to defeat all the other nations and unlock their technology to spawn that type of soldier for ourselves and get through all the encounters that the game throws at us. After the intro, the game opens up to a map of the world showing each nation you'll have to face along the way. The core gameplay loop is this. You spawn gold miners to mine for resources on your end of the battlefield. With these resources, you can buy soldiers to defend your base and to attack the opponent's base because the primary objective is to attack and destroy the enemy statue to win the round and ultimately to complete all the encounters and eventually beat the game. You can control any unit you want manually by clicking on them and moving around with WASD on your keyboard and using the spacebar to attack or to mine for gold if you're controlling a gold miner. Each unit that you spawn adds to your total maximum population count up to a total of 20. However, all the units will do what they need to do automatically. You don't need to control them if you don't want to. You do have to give them orders still, and there are 3 options at the top of the screen for giving orders. The left option will garrison all your troops behind the pike wall and your gold miners as well, which will protect them as the enemy cannot attack units inside there. The middle option will have your soldiers in a ready for battle position nearby the gold miners while they mine for gold, and the right option will send them out to attack the enemy. And let's talk about gold mining. By default, your gold miners will focus on the first set of nodes closest to your pike wall, and these resource nodes will be depleted eventually, and once that happens, they'll move out and focus the next batch of resource nodes, and your defending soldiers will advance alongside them to defend them as well. This means 2 things. It will take longer for the gold miners to deposit their gold because they do have to bring it back to the statue once their bags fill up, and it will take longer to garrison your troops, so stay vigilant if you're further out into the battlefield. Aside from the gold miners depositing gold, our statue generates a small amount of gold every second. By default, it's 2 gold per second. The first round of the game has you face off against the bow-wielding nation of Archidonus. The first round was pretty easy. The game has a helpful tutorial telling us what to do and how everything works. In the process of learning the game, we battled and defeated the archers, and in doing so, we unlocked the ability to spawn archers ourselves. The archer troop works really well against enemy units, but they do very minimal damage to the enemy statue, so when you're making your final push to win the game, it's probably ideal to bring at least some melee units with you so they can attack the statue. After the end of the first round, you'll be prompted to visit the armory so you can purchase upgrades for your statue and upgrades for your troops. You'll have the option to visit the armory after every round. To purchase upgrades, you need to spend upgrade points, and you get 2 points every time you visit the armory, so basically you get 2 points every round to spend. If you decide not to spend your points, they will carry over so you can spend them on the next visit should you decide to do it that way. I could see this being a viable route if, for example, you know you're about to unlock a specific unit in the next encounter, so you want to save the points that you have now so you can spend them on that unit you're about to unlock. Just one way I could see this being ideal. You can upgrade things like the archer's bow damage and the movement speed of your swordsman. I noticed that some upgrades are visually noticeable in-game, like when you upgrade your spearman's shield or your archer's attack. The physical shield they carry and the arrow they shoot respectively will look different after each upgrade, and this turn we upgraded the archer's attack by 25% and the mining rate of our gold miners by 20%. After that, we head back to the world map to move forward. On the way to attacking the Sword Nation, we are prompted with a random encounter. We have been ambushed by some natives and we need to fend them off until the sun sets. These guys were much tougher than the Archidonis Nation, and I actually lost the first attempt at this encounter. I feel like I lost this encounter because I wasn't using the garrison function properly. As I mentioned earlier, when you garrison your troops, they will take cover behind the defensive pike wall, which will protect them. However, one of your soldiers will also fire arrows at the enemies if they get too close. If I had utilized this in my first attempt, I might not have lost so quickly. Eventually, by spawning enough soldiers to defend against the increasing number of enemies, we survived our first random encounter. The encounter is pretty unique compared to the other ones so far. The enemy doesn't have a statue for us to destroy. Instead, they start with a small army of units right away, and the game gives us a few moments to build up a few units before sending the enemy at us. And I don't know if this is actually based off of time as the flavor text indicated at the beginning, or if we just have to kill a certain number of units to finish. At the end of the round, when we reached the armory, we upgraded the swordsman speed by 20% and we upgraded the castle hit points by 100%. As a side note, the game refers to the statue, as a castle, and as a monument. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the game will use these terms interchangeably. I guess it just depends on the situation. Moving forward to the next encounter, we face off against the Sword Wrath Nation, worshippers of the sword. We remained neutral for the early stage of this encounter, stacking up our gold and spawning 6 gold miners to fund our army of archers and melee units. We spawned mostly archers with a few clubmen. Once we capped out to the 20 spawned units, we went on the attack with a big assault, and the encounter was won pretty quickly after that. This will likely be our strategy for most of the encounters going forward, kind of turtling at the beginning, building up an army, and then going for a big push. After finishing the encounter, that unlocks the swordman unit for ourselves, which will replace our current melee unit, which uses clubs. When we reached the armory this round, we upgraded our swordsman attack by 20% and our gold miners carrying capacity also by 20%. The next nation we face are the Spearton. They are heavily armored and well trained. Their spears can be used in melee combat and can be thrown from a distance as well. However, it looks like once the spear is thrown, they will use a sword going forward, so it's a one-time throw. After beating them in this encounter, you will unlock their technology and the ability to spawn them yourself. On the recap screen at the end of the round, the game lists the controls for the unit. This looks like it's the first unit that can do more than a single attack. You can press Q to block, and you can press F to throw your spear, as well as spacebar to attack like you normally would. These guys are really strong units, but I practiced the same strategy from the last round. I built up a big army, and once I hit 20 units, I went in for the attack, and the enemy lost soon after that. When I reached the armory, I upgraded the gold miner's mining rate by 20%, and I upgraded the spearman's attack also by 20%. On the journey to the next nation, we were ambushed by the Sword Wrath. They went to regain the land that we took from them, and they are sending everything they have at us in attempts to reclaim it. We have to survive the ambush. Much like the last ambush, the enemy has no base and starts with a few units already spawned on the map. The game gives us a moment before the attack starts. Eventually, all the spawned enemy units charge after us in the initial attack, and once we cleared that wave, the game immediately sent a second wave of units, and then after that, they immediately sent a third wave of units. Pretty much a constant onslaught of enemy waves until they eventually had no one left to send, and we survived the ambush. And when we reached the armory, we upgraded the archer's attack by 25%, and we also upgraded our gold per second from the statue by an additional 2 gold. The next nation we're attacking is called the Magic Hill. These are the worshippers of magic. The lands are ruled by wizards who can cast spells to stun infantry and summon minions. This was a really fun encounter. The wizards spawn little melee units with pitchforks, and they spawned them pretty often, so there were plenty of enemy units to fight. But once I got past that initial wave of enemies and successfully defended our people, I was able to send a small army of archers and swordsmen to the enemy base, then I basically kept them under a constant barrage of arrows while sending more and more melee units to tear down their monument. Eventually, another wave of wizards and minions spawned, but by that point it was too late and we were too powerful. After finishing the encounter, we unlocked a wizard unit type for ourselves, and once we reached the armory, I clicked on this empty space in front of the mage to see what it did because I noticed that my cursor had changed and it advanced me beyond the armory and to the next encounter, and there was seemingly no way to return, so I was unable to spend my upgrade points. After that, we pressed on to the nation of Pertland. The Archidonis and Swordwrath have teamed up and are ruthlessly rolling over Pertland, and this is our first encounter where the enemy consists of multiple nations, meaning multiple enemy types in a single battle. The enemy sent a swordsman at us almost immediately. Thankfully, we didn't spend all of our starting gold on gold miners, and we were able to defend against it. However, very shortly after that, we were defeated. They sent a never-ending onslaught of swordsmen and archers at us. On the end screen, there was a tip that speartons are good at blocking enemy arrows and are also good against swordsmen, so we're going to try a new strategy involving them this time around. At this point, I'm regretting accidentally not spending my upgrade points before the battle, as those upgrade points really could have helped us out for this fight. The tip about spearmen seemed to work really well though, and we had no problem defending against the first wave of swordsmen and archers. We were able to defend long enough to buy an archer of our own. The second wave was all swordsmen, and our archer actually one-shotted each swordsman as they approach, just one headshot after another. We went on the offensive after that with our spearmen and archers, and we even brought along a wizard, which was very expensive, and it died pretty quickly. So far it seems the cost of the wizard compared to its performance was pretty imbalanced, and I don't know if I'll use them a whole lot going forward. We nearly defeated them before they spawned a big wave of units and pushed us back. They actually pushed us back so far that we only had one gold miner and one swordsman left alive that we sent back behind our pike wall under a garrison, but when we got there, they only had a single archer left, but we couldn't get close enough with our one swordsman to do anything about it, so we turtle inside of our garrison until our gold per second builds up enough to spawn another spearman or archer. Meanwhile, the enemy sends a few swordsmen to attack our monument, but our garrison unit shoots them down with arrows, and eventually the enemy archer steps just a bit closer, putting him in range of our defending archer. We take him out, we spawn an archer of our own, and we go back on the attack. With this final push, we make it to their base, we tear down their monument, and free the citizens of Pertland. Once we reach the armory this time, we have 4 upgrade points instead of 2 because of our previous mistake. We upgrade our archer's attack by 25%, which maxes out that stat. We also upgrade our pickaxes for a final time, increasing our mining rate by another 20%. And finally, we upgrade our spearman's health by 20% and our spearman's shield. Upgrading the shield of the spearmen increases their health by 10%, and it increases the chance that their blocks will be successful. After that, our scouts have reported speartons that are being backed by Archidonis are infiltrating the Westwind countryside, so we're going to head there to free another nation. We start this encounter with the usual strategy. We build up a few units and wait for the enemy to attack first. We purchase a spearmen, an extra gold miner, and 2 archers. The enemy sends out a few spearmen for the first wave. It's at this point that I notice our fully upgraded archers are shooting fire arrows now, which is pretty awesome, and that's when I learned that tidbit about the upgrades being noticeable. After a bit of killing back and forth, we set our units on the offensive. The battle wages in the center of the battlefield for a while until we push forward enough and ultimately defeat the enemy. We have freed the nation of Westwind of its invaders. A bit of flavor text at the end screen reads that the last of the enemy has been pushed back into the barely habitable lands to the north. We must march on and stamp them out for good. When we reach the armory, we upgrade our spearman's attack by 20%, which is the final attack upgrade for them, and we upgrade their shield again, giving them an additional 10% health and increased block chance. The next nation is called No Man's Land. The start screen reads that the natives of No Man's Land are said to be monsters of gargantuan proportions. Once the game starts, we scroll over and get a look at our enemy, and holy crap, these dudes are big. We're looking at a giant wielding a giant club and dragging a person behind him. The enemy also has a visible health bar, and before even fighting him, like all gamers know, that indicates that this is going to be a pretty tough fight. We're going into this initial battle with 2 archers, and we get absolutely wrecked. A couple takeaways from that fight: A, when they attack, they deal massive amounts of damage to the statue. B, they stun enemies when they hit them. And C, they don't automatically kill our units when they hit them. So we're going to try a new strategy. To slow them down, we're going to send out our troops on the attack much sooner than we normally would. That should keep giants off of our monument a little bit longer while we fight them back. And instead of spawning an archer right away, we're going to spawn several swordsmen instead. This strategy worked pretty well compared to our first attempt. However, in the end, they pushed us back pretty close to our base, and as our miners moved further and further into the battlefield, it was too hard to spawn troops of our own. During the last stretch of the battle, we decided we're going to take control of one of the swordsmen manually and move him around ourselves, and we went and manually attacked the enemy's monument while our AI controlled units fought it out on the battlefield, and this is actually how we won the encounter. On the end screen, it shows that we unlocked the giants as a new unit, and that's what the big empty platform was on the armory screen that I accidentally clicked on earlier in the game. When we reached the armory, I upgraded the swordsman attack by 20% and their speed by 20%. On the way to the next nation, we got ambushed by a native tribe. We have to survive the onslaught. There is no enemy monument for us to destroy. We just have to kill enough enemies to win the round. They started with a handful of clubmen and a giant. We used the same strategy as before for the giant by spawning a bunch of swordsmen and sent them out to attack right away. After that, we spawned a few archers as well and built up a small army of units while defending the base. This strategy worked and we survived the ambush. When we reached the armory, we upgraded the swordsman attack by 20% and the gold miner's carrying capacity by 20%. The next encounter takes place in the mountains called Ice Hills. When we get there, we arrive at an encampment full of the enemy's elite leaders. This was the most difficult encounter so far by a long shot. The enemies were the strongest, and the enemy used every unit type except for spearmen, so lots of swordsmen, archers, giants, wizards, plus their minions. After retrying for a half hour, we finally beat them. The best strategy we used was to keep sending out swordsmen, but not one at a time. We would let 3 build up, then we would send them out, then we'd call them back, add a few more to the group, then send them back out. After that, we sent them out as often as we could spawn them, all while saving up for a giant, and the giant was the game changer for us. Once we got a giant out there, we won the battle. The end screen reads that Inamorta is now within our grasp. Our enemies have pulled their resources and army for one last stand in the dark mountains, and that we should be careful as they may have a trick up their sleeves. Once we reach the armory, we upgrade our gold miners by 20% to max out the stat, and we upgrade our gold per second by an additional 2, bringing that up to a total of 6 gold per second or 360 gold per minute. Moving on to the Dark Mountains, the start screen tells us that our best chance is to use all of our technologies we've unlocked during our conquest so far. This encounter plays out much like the last one and we use the same strategy. However, this time we're able to spawn 2 more gold miners than we were able to last round. This really helped boost our gold income, and because of that we got a giant out really early, and after that we were regularly at or near the maximum unit count of 20 for most of the encounter, and we pretty quickly tore down the enemy statue. However, when we broke the stone exterior of the statue, in its place was a giant. So this big bad boss must have been the trick up their sleeve that they had mentioned in the opening screen. However, sadly for them, at this point we had a huge army on the battlefield and the fight wasn't much of an issue. After a short battle, we took down the boss and we won the encounter, and ultimately that is where we beat the game, and that's the long and short of Stick War. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, farewell.